Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at USAA.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
From the Fifth Quarter Studio in Madison, Wisconsin, you're listening to the Coaching Youth Hoops Podcast.
They're playing
Basketball. Here's our hosts, Steve Collins. And Bill Flitter.
Coaches, welcome to another episode of Coaching Youth Hoops. I am your host, Coach Bill Flitter. Today we have our guest back, Shay Balish. This is your 4th time, Shay. Might be a record for having guests back on. We appreciate you taking the time. We go in with the idea that, hey, let's do about a half an hour, and we end up staying for about an hour because you're just full of knowledge, and I always have so many good questions for you. So again, I really appreciate your time, your generosity to our community. So welcome to the show, Shay.
Bill, you're making me blush. I appreciate it. This is fun. No, this is fun. It's a great conversation, and this is the way it should occur. It's not a lecture. It's not a, it's really enjoyable just to be here and have a great conversation.
And without PowerPoint slides, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So Shay, for our listeners who are tuning in for the first time, who's Shay? What do you do?
So I guess the interesting background for me is I'm a horrible Canadian. I don't play hockey. Never really skated at all.
Soon to be a Canadian American.
Yeah.
You're reading the news. You know what that joke is all about.
Who knows? I've read the news quite closely, and it's actually a fun thing to debate. It's not so clear cut. I think a lot of Canadians pushing back on it, but it's not so clear cut. But anyways, I'm a big basketball playing Canadian. I played at the university level, coached. I come from a family of coaches. My father coached for many years on the east coast of Canada. Ended up doing a PhD in sports psychology. Was working at the University of Toronto for a very short time before I left to build this company. And it's been just so fun to try to use technology to create more value for young athletes in terms of their health and their performance. It's just so fun. And, technology, if you define it right, is doing more with less. And when you can give back and actually create real value, it's really fun. So this has been a fun transition for me, away from academia, away from being an applied sports psychologist to, I guess, an entrepreneur. But it's enjoyable to come back on these types of media platforms and have great conversations.
Yeah, well, awesome. And you guys are doing a fantastic job of what you're doing over at Curb Health. So we really appreciate that. So we're going to be talking about, and if you're a sports fan and you can't ignore it, the NIL, what it becomes to become an elite level athlete in today's world. The landscape is completely changing. What parents have to do to take, let's say, their freshman basketball player, even younger, all the way through to college and then beyond. So let's just dive in and talk about this. So one of the big things with the NIL and social media is getting the highlights up there and how should a family start thinking about building the athlete's personal brand, and what are the potential pitfalls of the just doing it too early, and what's too early? We're focused on right now, for our discussion, kind of this high school age, right, athlete. So
Absolutely.
thoughts on
Absolutely.
that?
The journey, yeah, it is. There's a whole field of research, some of it in the fields of sports psychology, where they try to understand the developmental pathway of elite athletes and what is the best pathway? How should we design all of our systems, our coaching programs, all the way down to the healthcare for these athletes? In terms of building out a personal brand in this new world of social media, really,
Yeah.
people are leaving traditional media, and recruiters and coaches increasingly relying on short tidbits, less and less so on kind of word of mouth. That it is incumbent upon families and athletes to make sure that they have a strong athletic resume, whether that's recruiting profile or highlight profile or just statistics that actually get out there. Um, the biggest the biggest thing to think about though for youth athletes is their motivation. And there's a lot of people, in the world that say, courage is in far shorter supply than intelligence. And probably also in athletics at the youth ages, motivation, the motivation that it takes to be an elite athlete is in far shorter supply than the competency to actually be an elite athlete. Elite athletes are often a little neurodivergent. Now, that's a nice way of saying it. They
Yeah.
are incredibly competitive, incredibly obsessive, incredibly detailed, very much intelligent. And it's so, if that is sometimes a limiting factor at the early ages to go through the process and make your way through, anything that you can do to sustain that flame of motivation, excuse me, is really important. In our current state of youth sport, I think it's very easy to really blow out that candle, to blow out that flame. And parents are often the biggest culprits out of their own, the goodness of their heart and the care they
Right.
have for their athletes. They often believe, as any parent would, that they know what's best for their own kid, and will try to push them into scenarios where oftentimes the motivation may start to falter. And that's one of the scariest things. And so creating the conditions creating the fertile ground for your young athlete to blossom into elite athlete is probably the only way and definitely the best way. Forcing it, especially for these young athletes that are competitive themselves, sometimes can backfire. To finish this little rant, I would say what comes along with this elite athlete mindset, this like ruthlessly resourceful, competitive, all in
Disciplined,
mindset.
right?
Sorry?
Disciplined.
Discipline, absolutely. But what comes along with that sometimes is this need for autonomy, this
What do you
need,
mean by that?
the need to dictate what their own life and their own behavior. They become very independent minded. That often you see that come along with competitiveness, sorry.
Yeah.
And I think parents should be aware of that. So if you got a really competitive athlete, that's an amazing thing. Create the conditions to let it flourish, and be very wary around thinking you know what's best for the athlete to do, even if you do know what's best. So, for example, to make this practical,
Yeah.
if you have a young athlete that it's very clear they should be doing some additional thing or some different direction in their youth sport career, for a parent to go and mandate that and saying, hey, you have to do this, I know what's best, there's that risk of a fight. I mean, we all know this if you have kids. I don't have necessarily have kids, but I have friends, and I hope they have kids someday. But if you can put that kid in conversation, maybe with a peer that's 3 or 4 years older, who that peer then tells them, hey, I went this other direction that your parents are saying, it was actually the best path.
Mm.
You should look into that. That type of behavior, that type of interaction will be so much more valuable than a parent trying to mandate it. And so
Yeah.
getting back to this question of what does it take to be an elite athlete? Motivation at early ages is paramount, and parents can do that if they can do that. And there's times to mandate certain things for your children and tell them what to do. But if you can just foster the right environment where the right ideas bubble up to them and they feel it's like their own, they're going to be more successful, right? If you want
Yeah.
something done, convince the person you're telling it to that it's their idea.
Exactly. Yeah, and as a parent, we often just, I know best, so do it. I'm just trying to save you all of the, trial and error. It's like, right? The other thing when it comes to elite level athletes, I've had this discussion over and over. My athlete doesn't take it serious. Okay. And, then they'll explain what that means. Now there's the, oh, they don't want to go to practice type of not taking it serious. But then there's the serious of, well, look at her on the court. She's laughing and she looks like she's goofing around all the time. And I started to buy into that, and I started to fall in some cases to the pressure of, hey, you're not taking it serious enough. And until I realized, looking at stats, looking at really truly what was happening on the court with this particular athlete and athletes like this, excuse me, uh, she was just having fun. She was enjoying being competitive. So let's not get caught up in this idea of, I got to have this killer mentality and I just have to be out to, kill the opponent and, destroy them. I can do that with a smile on my face and still be competitive, but that's not how we perceive this type of elite level athlete. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think people conflate a lot of different aspects. Competitiveness doesn't necessarily mean violence or aggression. And there's many ways of competing. And so when you really look at, certain athletes, sometimes their competitiveness boils over and it can lead to aggression because they're so goal oriented, and some people will get in their way of achieving that goal, but it doesn't necessarily require any type of aggression or any type of intimidation or even trash talking to make it practical necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's like a wisdom in that. I've tended to coach young men, and not to make gendered or sex specific, to talk about sex or gender differences, but I would often sometimes scold some of my more competitive athletes because their competitiveness would lead to sometimes aggression that was actually hurting their performance.
Mm,
That they wanted to gloat if they had dunked the ball, and gloat and not run back fast enough to prevent the fast break on the other end. I would highlight how contradictory that actually is and how anti-competitive, and how they must not really care about winning if they're willing to engage in those. And so helping the athletes define that line between what true competitiveness is, and the focus on winning versus the kind of the social uh, you know, gloating
yeah.
and aggression is important, I think, teaching point for athletes.
All right. So I'm going to paint you a scenario. Um, I have I'm a parent. I have an athlete who let's say they're freshmen in high school. They're showing uh, they're showing ability. They and not only just ability, but they seem to be gravitating towards basketball, and they look pretty good compared to their peers. Okay, they have stressed to me that they want to play at the next level. They want to play in college. At a high level, walk me through the next 4 years. Again, at a high level, there's lots of, and I know there's lots of nuances to every situation, but in today's landscape, what can I do to as a parent, as a coach, help this athlete pursue their dream? Let's assume they're talented enough that they could.
Right. So this is not really a question of improving performance, but also
We're going to
ensuring
come
that.
back to that where it's like, are you sure this athlete's good enough to play at the next level? Because, we got rose-colored glasses on when you have kids. So we'll come back to that question.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough question of how to brand. And in this world, branding matters. I mean, who would have known that the average person, if you work in business, really needs a clean, attractive looking LinkedIn profile? But you do, right?
Yeah.
And signaling our qualities in the society is really important, and it matters for athletes, and parents can help with that. Now, the first thing to recognize is athletes usually have an understanding of how to go about that. Um, Setting the right expectations for what the next level is probably one of the best ways to ensure that you do make the next level. And having the long-term vision in mind. Very few people go on to pro sports. And so if you do recognize that the athlete and the parent recognize that their athletic career likely ends at the next level, if they're not going to the WNBA or the NBA in particular with basketball,
Mhm.
that I have found that can help recalibrate where they want to go play university or college basketball.
Hmm.
And
Makes sense,
that
I
can
think.
help
Yeah.
them more likely find a place, whether it be a D2 school or even a JUCO school or some other institution. And it allows them to start to optimize for other qualities than pure sports. Maybe, the actual quality of the education will matter more for some of them. But practically getting on, like building a recruiting profile, putting the stats out there, and getting in front of the right coaches really makes a difference. Certain recruiting companies are better than others, and they can help you. Um, but in this age, a lot of coaches are, and especially if you're not going to the most competitive programs, which again, if you're, maybe you're not going to the top school you want to go to that are the best in the nation. The schools that have less competitive programs, which the athlete is more likely to find themselves, joining that team, they also care sometimes, what in my experience, they seem to care about other qualities as well. It's not necessarily pure athletic potential. They care about having a good culture on the team. So if you can start to differentiate yourself among your peers on being a cultural lightning rod for your team or making your coach's life easier by facilitating good sportsmanship on the team or showing that you're going to increase the average GPA of the team by being a great student. These things are often overlooked. They're often overlooked. That's so those are the two things really is differentiating yourself with the intangibles because there's a lot you can bring to a team that's more than pure athletic performance. And then the second of all is you got to get really good at branding yourself and in this social media landscape, getting in front of the right people, the right coaches at the right time. Um, there's no two ways about it.
Yeah, and I guess also being on the right AU program helps, the high school program. We're seeing a lot in recent years of athletes going and creating super teams, right? Being recruited in high school, right? In high school, right? And they're it's all, it's prevalent everywhere in every community. I have opinions of that, and I don't know. I think in a lot of cases we're robbing our kids of being kids and all that comes with being a teenager on one hand. And the other hand is, well, who says that that isn't the right path for an individual? Um, but at the same time, it's like, what's going to last longer, them as a human being productive in society, or them playing basketball, right? So,
Absolutely.
and I think that's just of course, it's an individual. You got to, it's an individual thing, but I don't know.
It's so
It
tough.
it
It's
is.
so tough. I see these super teams. I mean, even the NCAA is at a kind of a somewhat existential risk around if is just the richest schools going to just attract the best athletes, and are they going
Right.
to like
Yep.
separate and break away and have their own little leagues, and because
That's
the
right.
competitive level is so different, and is that going to like break the foundation of the NCAA? We don't know. But a lot of these questions are happening, and I think there are athletes that end up joining super teams that do themselves a real disservice. Like it can help, right? If you have a high profile team
If
and you need
right.
to get identified,
And you
and
know
if it,
you're going to play and not just sit on the bench,
well, that's the thing. It's like
right?
you never really know, right? And if you haven't already demonstrated some individual accolades and you're doing it mainly for a branding reason of joining the super, I guess this is what I'm boiling down and saying. In my opinion, super teams are a branding exercise rather than a developmental exercise.
Yeah.
At these levels, it's still valuable for the best athletes to learn how to make their teammates better and to play with the level that they anticipate. They're going to be facing all the double teams, a box and one, whatever it may be, where they necessarily wouldn't experience that on the super team. And then maybe they can practice at a higher level. Maybe their gamesmanship is a little bit different, but I think the actual, the reps they get in games is going to be far less being on a more even key a higher talent level team. And so athletes that do that prematurely are really, you know, stalling their progression in the hopes that they're just going to get identified and go to a great school.
Well, this brings up the question that I hear all the time, even at the lower levels, the grade school levels. It's they have an opportunity to be on an AAU elite team and sit on the bench, or be on the B team of that same group, that same club, and play all the time.
Mhm.
Also, oh my, the parents get all upset when their daughter or son doesn't make, let's just call it varsity, and they are on the JV team. Where on the JV team, they're going to play every game. And they're going to be, the top one or two people on that JV team, but they'll never be able to say I didn't make varsity as a freshman or as a sophomore, right? And we get caught up in that. Okay, so I think you've already answered this question, but if I'm faced with a choice, again, generally speaking, more playing time on a second tier, let's call it JV, or a second tier, AAU team versus very limited minutes in a game, but I do get to practice twice a week, or depending on, the AAU team or the high school team, 5 days a week against the better athletes, but I don't see much gameplay. What's the advice you would give a parent?
My advice always, and this is the least interesting thing I can probably say on this podcast, is that each athlete and parent needs to look at every opportunity for themselves and really understand the nature of it. Maybe you have a phenomenal coach and that all the practice, like sitting on the bench or getting, 7-10 minutes a game versus, 30 or more, uh, might not matter so much if you have a phenomenal coach and you really need that exposure being on a certain circuit, for example.
Hmm.
But if your athlete's still really growing and starting to solidify themselves as a top tier athlete, getting the reps in game of having the ball, making decisions, facing the double teams, in my opinion, is better for performance. Now, that is a general
General, of
statement.
course, yeah. Yep.
I always say look at the individual differences and between the opportunities that you have. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're at a crazy time right now too. 2025, college recruiting is changing. The NIL is, it was well intended. It's not being, in my opinion, executed very well. Just 5 years ago, you could say, okay, it's a more clear-cut path. This is what you have to do to play, and um, but now it's cloudy, and it's going to probably be a little bit cloudy over the next few years. I've talked to, a couple athletic directors at college, and they'll say they'll never recruit out of high school because they'll just go to the portal. At least they've had at least they've been in game situation, a lot of these players, right, that are in the portal. And why not spend time there? Athletes getting paid now, and crazy, they're leaving. They finish, March Madness, and top four teams, and the next year everyone is gone from that team. They were just in the top four, right? The final four. And now everybody's gone looking for other opportunities. So this whole idea of loyalty and building a program uh, is gone, at least right now, until something changes it and kind of settles it down, right?
Yes. I think that sports, the dark side, and as someone who loves sports and has played it his entire life,
Yeah.
to be honest about the dark side of sports is that it can sometimes foster a culture where people over rely on the gains to their status, to their ego. And there's many things in life that people can, can make a poor decision and go down the wrong path for. And sometimes those paths, it's chasing ego. And you can look at number of athletes who maybe go play university for a couple years, don't really focus on their education, spend 3 years in a pro team making a little money, and they come out and all of a sudden they're late 20s. They don't have a career set. They wish they did. They feel the time's behind them. And they made a seemingly wrong step in their life, something that at least in their own words, they would regret.
Hey, coaches, welcome, welcome, welcome. Sorry to interrupt the podcast, but before we jump back in, I want to give a big shout out to two of our sponsors. First of all, Game Changer. If you're looking for places to manage your schedule, to schedule practices, to keep track of stats, to live stream, which was I don't remember, I think I was visiting my son in it was like parent weekend or something, and I was live streaming watching my team in the fall league. It was awesome. One of the parents was doing it, but go over and check it. It does highlight tapes. It helps with your scheduling, which I always find is a pain. So go over and check that out at gc.com/coaching youth hoops. And then also go over and check out Curve. What keeps me up at night are the, especially now with the flu and season and cold season, are they taking care of themselves? What I'm pumped about is this Curve kind of listen to the people that wanted what they wanted. And it's kind of this AI powered sports science platform, which deals with mental health, deals with sleep and nutrition and injury prevention. And it all puts it and it's trusted by the pros. It's all kind of in one spot. Now it's available to high school, and this free trial is awesome. coachingyouthhoops.com/health to get your free trial. You won't regret it. Trust me when you go over and check it out. All right, let's head back to the podcast.
Words they would regret. So there are some aspects of that. And then what I think now has even kind of put this status chasing motivation at its highest level is social media. And so if you can have a conversation with your athletes that can help them understand how chasing status could actually be a detriment to their whole sport experience, and that they're very unlikely to go play pro sports, and that they should focus on a phenomenal experience playing sports, building friends, getting a good education, that can help them reset and change a lot of the decisions they might otherwise make. Because sports is a lot of time, and there are big opportunity costs of doing that. And I even think there's companies in this space that end up trying to sell a dream too much.
Yep, I totally
agree. And it's easy to prey on parents and athletes who want that dream. But the way to evaluate that is to look who sometimes regrets those decisions. And there are many athletes that go on and kind of miss out on other aspects of life, and they regret them a little bit. And so having those conversations with your young athletes is important. It's hard to do because the nature of being a competitor is go all in, right?
Yep.
Burn the boats and be as best you can and try to play at the highest level possible. And that's what ultimately we should be doing. But a little awareness of the cost of doing that can help people recalibrate their decisions, I think.
Yeah, and I always this fine line of, someone telling me, if I'm training a kid and, it's like, oh, he has aspirations to play at the next level. Well, and I work him out and I'm like, and okay, we got a good workout in. And it's like, okay, maybe next practice he cancels, reschedules. I always got this going on and that going on. Or I just realized like, ah, man, you're gonna have to put a lot more work into this to get to realize your dream. And I never want to tell an athlete, at least a young athlete, you know what, you're not cut out, right? And I know there's other ways to soften that by saying, okay, are you ready for that type of responsibility? Here's the laundry list of things that you'll have to do, right? And here are some things you may have to give up to sacrifice to realize that dream. And I think that's a better way of saying that. But when there's an athlete that just, I mean, just especially as they get towards the high school level and they're just not, they don't have the athletic ability to compete at that level. When do you get real with them? Right? And
It
as a
is such a
parent, and it's hard.
it's such a tough conversation to have. And ultimately, I think you set up the circumstances for them to come to that realization themselves.
Hmm.
And again, like how ironic and funny is the world set up where like parents speaking directly to their kids sometimes isn't always the best strategy. Of course, everyone wants to be direct and transparent and like say it like it is. But the kids come installed with software that sometimes wants to supersede or navigate around their parents. And so, having your athletes talk to some athletes that have gone through the process, maybe just graduated or in university, and they can kind of talk some sense to them and help them understand. Now, the other part is the beauty of sports in some ways. So in my research days, this was never published, but we jokingly called some of the personality and the character development benefits of playing sports. We called it the kind of failure vaccination hypothesis, which is what sports actually do for young athletes is give them seemingly very real ways to fail, right? You're learning to compete. You're learning that what you give is what you get is what you give. And you have to earn it, and you got to cooperate, and you got to develop all these social skills and real opportunities. And for most, there is some type of at least failure broadly defined because they're not going on to the pro level. And so they develop all of these skills and they recognize what it takes and they take that into other areas. And that transition, that like learning curve of having the school of hard knocks that is sports sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Taking that into the rest of their life is the beautiful transition. And when sometimes that transition becomes broken because there's too much ego or a failure to be aware, like a failure to not accept some of the learnings that sport can offer people. And so that's where I really worry about it, and some people like to say it's quite clear in sprinting, right? At least it's somewhat clear you fail fast and you're not going to be maybe the best ever. But in some of these other team sports, the dream can go on, and there can be sometimes a little bit of wasted time spent doing something where someone's life could be a lot more productive or fulfilling doing something else. So yeah, it's tough, and you do want your athletes to fail at some level, but it's the right type of failures.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I had only got two things. I had breakfast this morning with a Division I volleyball player, and she played at big time college. And she's out. She's in the workforce. She's a year and a half into her career. And one thing that she had a first interview, she's getting a second interview, and she was sitting down. We were going through the questions they might ask, and one of the things that came up in the conversation was she wasn't this particular thing, right? You're not always 100% qualified for the job. And I said to her, but wait a second, you need to bring in the fact that there's this, you're very well organized. You had to be. You had two full-time jobs. You're a Division I athlete and you were a college student, and you had to be disciplined and organized. And that's what employers want. They want you to be disciplined and organized, right? And be able to manage multiple projects. And they said this is exactly what you did, and you need to relate it back to your athletic ability or your experience as an athlete. And I bring that up because of the life experiences sports should be teaching us. And I don't care. You don't have to be an elite level athlete at a Division I program. You can be an high school athlete and learn those same skills. And if we as a coaching community realize that we're not teaching the sport, stop teaching the sport. If I was on my bandwagon and could, had my magic wand and, stand on this pedestal and say, stop teaching the sport. The sport is one small aspect of it. That's not why we do sport.
No.
We need to teach life lessons and how sport can help us learn how to fail, how to win with grace, how to lose with grace, how to deal with people you don't maybe necessarily like, how to speak to adults, how to bite your tongue when a ref makes quote unquote the bad call, how to deal with your mom and dad who you really respect, who quite frankly are being out of line, right? How to deal with a coach who you don't like, but you know what? He's the high school coach and you got to deal with him. Just like someday you might have a boss that way. And if we can teach those things, the athletes will rise to the top who are going to go on to play, and we will create a better society and get our focus off of what we're focused on right now, which is the money aspect of sports, and just into the idea of just, I want my athlete to play Division I because, like you said before, it's an ego. Like, stop.
Yeah, absolutely. And
sorry, I went on a rant there. I don't usually
that
rant
was
like
good,
that, but
Bill.
man, it's just like, let's go.
That's a good one. I completely believe and buy everything you're saying. I think that, the best kids are going to rise to the top. A coach isn't necessarily going to stall or hurt a kid from becoming that elite level athlete if they have the qualities to. They're going to get noticed, they're going to get seen, they're going to be in the right environment. And yeah, you might be able to accelerate their learning a little bit. But one thing a coach can do is fail to institute all of those great learning experiences. Right?
Absolutely.
And they can really rob the kid, because if you really think, what is the benefit? And you interview a bunch of people that played sports growing up and you say, do you regret that, or were you happy about that? What did you really gain from that? Was that a good investment of time during your childhood? And the vast majority say, yes, I became a better man or a better woman because of it.
Absolutely.
That is the real yield, and coaches need to understand that is actually their responsibility. And it can manifest in many different ways. Discipline, of course, being able to push yourself beyond your limits. I played for some rowdy, authoritarian, old school coaches that would say crazy things, but the way at least I responded to them made me realize I had layers that I could tap into to become a better player and a better person. I could push myself far beyond what I anticipated athletically, aerobically, but also socially. I went from being this all-star athlete in a small town, like a little like Indiana Hoosier type community in Eastern Canada, to, scoring 50, 60 points a game in junior high, to quickly becoming a role player on a essentially provincial team when I'm 14. What a phenomenal change in role, right? Where I'm averaging, 40 points to maybe averaging 15 or, 10 or 15. And I'm setting a lot more screens and I'm working on getting everyone, like, phenomenal learning experiences from those coaches. And, I wouldn't take anything back, but, I'm glad I had those social learnings, because if I look back on my sport experience personally and I say, actually, it made me a little bit more of a mean guy, or I'm a little bit more jaded now, or competitive, or it would really put a bad taste in my mouth around my whole sport experience. So if that's really what they hold, the coaches need to know that's their responsibility.
Well, yeah, and I look at my own personal experience with my child, who is now a senior in college. He wanted to play in college, was a backup catcher on his high school team to a player that uh, went to I don't know where, Michigan, to be a catcher. And my son walked on at his team, got at least a tryout, did the fall ball with the baseball team, and then came to the realization that, yeah, no, it's not for me. Like, but then he felt so bad about it, and the reason he felt bad was because of the investment his mom and dad made me in his baseball career prior to that.
Hmm.
And he apologized. I'm like, dude, that, you don't have to, that's not, you don't have to apologize. Like, that's part of who you were, what you did. And, he was all in on baseball. I bet he caught more innings, because he worked with a pitching coach than any other catcher in the Bay Area, during his
Wow.
high school career. Um, but like, when you're done, you're done. And his coach had the best response. His college coach. He walked in, and of course my son was all nervous, and what is he going to say? And because he felt like he was quitting, like, quitting is a bad thing, right? My son just realized his path wasn't going to be baseball for the next 4 years. And his coach said, and this is a good coach, he said, Jack, everybody has this day. Yours just happened to be now. I had this day. I got to play at a higher level, but I had the day. Every player has this day. You come in and tell the coach, like, yep, I'm done. And you have to admit to yourself that you're done. And I just thought that was a beautiful thing. One, it's just like, yes, you invest in your children, and we haven't even touched on that subject. Um, but we do it because they're our children, and we want to help them pursue a passion, something they love. And as you can't just walk onto your high school team, in most high schools these days, and never played before and then try to make your basketball team. Not going to happen in most cases. Uh, so we need trainers. We need to play year round. We need AAU teams at the youth level. $2,000 just to join the team a year, right? Plus all the travel, and it's getting really expensive, and it's weeding out maybe potential athletes who can't afford to be there,
Yeah.
right?
And it's weeding, to interrupt, sorry. It's
No,
also
you're
weeding
good. Yeah.
out different styles of playing the sport. In basketball,
Mm-hmm.
basketball has always had a culture of scrimmaging, if you want to call it that. Pick up hoops.
Oh,
You
right.
shoot the
Yeah.
court, winner stays on, and you keep playing. And
Yeah.
that nature of interaction, there's real learning there that occurs. Um, And it seems to me like that stuff, those experiences or opportunities are also no longer relevant. It's highly regimented basketball that's um
Organized by adults. There's no
organized.
free play, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
And,
there's,
and and when you really look at some examples of basketball, let's just take some like stereotypical examples. Inner city basketball, often, dominated by the black community. Amazing. Talking about Rucker Park.
mm-hmm.
Those environments produced phenomenal athletes with amazing talent. Now, of course, they had phenomenal coaches in there, but do we really think all of that talent development could be attributed to those amazing coaches they had in there? No, the nature of the scrimmaging, the nature of that pickup basketball teaches all these amazing instincts and workings. And so it's almost like, this topic is around the nature of becoming an elite level athlete and what it's like. Those opportunities are so fleeting now that I feel like there might be opportunities to recreate them. If you were to say, gun to head, hey Shay, parents listening to this, what's the number one thing they could do to help their kid become a better basketball player? Probably just playing with older players.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have the second option, probably be playing with younger players. Age mixing, we've talked about previously,
Yeah, we
but
talked about age mixing.
it can be a phenomenal learning way, like to scaffold, right? When you have a gifted kid in high school, we've all heard about those kids that drop out of high school and finish a PhD at Berkeley when they're 18, right? And there is ways to kind of go, and often if you even study those precocious kids, they often are studying and learning and involving themselves with much older individuals who have captured some type of skill or content. So that is another easily overlooked aspect. Like getting your kid into scrimmages with older athletes and maybe younger athletes, but at least older athletes to start with, where they can start to adapt to the tricks of the trade,
Yeah.
and learn those skills. It can be a really valuable learning experience.
Yeah, and I always, well, two things come to mind. I always think, oh, we're dating ourselves if we're thinking kids are going to scrimmage and just go do a pickup game, right? Because honestly, when do they have time?
Yeah.
When do they have time? They'd have AAU practice twice a week, and then on the weekends they're off to a tournament all weekend. Sometimes Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? 40 weekends out of 52. So
Yep.
when do they have time just to call a bunch of buddies and say we're going to meet? They don't. They're overscheduled, and they might, basketball might be one of the activities that they do. So, this the idea of just allowing kids to have free time, free play, it's not like what it was when we were kids. And I'm much older than you are. We didn't have the electronics, and that's what we had. We had to go out, ride our bike, go down to the courts, you know. And the thing about basketball is obviously you don't need all you need is a ball and a hoop, right? You don't even need a hoop if you're just practicing, but you're dribbling. Um, I don't know. I think about this idea of a scrimmage and winner stays on the court, right? I always get pushback from the younger athletes and I say we're doing a scrimmage and I said it's always winner's ball. And they're like, well, that's not how basketball works. I'm like, well, that it makes you more competitive because you want to stay on the court. Like I'm not, yeah, I understand that's not the way basketball works, but work harder to stay on the court. If you don't like coming off, then be more competitive, right? Make sure the other team doesn't score. But
There
I was
is
old.
I love, maybe I'm too much of a contrarian sometimes,
I know.
but in some ways, you know, it's easy to conflate competitiveness and um, status driving. But if you really separate those two, it's almost like there's been too much status driving, too much looking cool in the sport of
Mm,
basketball,
yeah.
and actually
Yep.
maybe not enough actual real competitiveness. Um, People are scared to, go all in, because going all in today's world means really risking failure, right?
God
And
forbid we do that,
and
right?
in this social media age where anyone can be
Yeah.
ostracized for saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, or the wrong clip goes viral, you get a lot of kids that aren't willing to put it all on the line and
That's a
go
good
all in.
point,
So,
Yeah, that's a good point, Shay.
and
That's
so it's
yeah.
it's tough. I'm reminded of this old, I don't like this analogy. It often triggers all my friends in sports when I say it. But I find it an interesting little perspective change, where that they say that if you are a good loser, right? You exhibit really good sportsmanship from losing,
Yeah.
you're an actual loser, because the real winners are poor losers. The real
Yeah.
winners care so much about losing that they can't help but be unsportsmanlike when they lose. And I don't necessarily believe that to be true. I definitely don't. I studied sportsmanship and morality in sport, and how to develop moral character with athletes. I actually published some studies on that. But it does give you a perspective change around, like, there are certain elite athletes, which we started this talk about, that are really neurodivergent. Like
Yeah.
Michael Jordan, he is the top of my list. I still fanboy over the guy, idolize. Truly not just the best athlete, but best competitor. But is he a guy that, you know, if you had, if
Was
he
he a
was
good
growing up,
loser?
if you had a daughter, would you want her to, be his partner. Maybe, maybe not. He's addicted to competition. He can't help but gamble and
Yeah.
challenge people. And
Interesting. Right.
he,
Yeah.
so there is this, and with the elite level athletes, and maybe an angle here for parents, if you're listening, parents and coaches, and you're working with some athletes that have some, at least in the youth sport, maybe like behavioral or they're neurodivergent, right? They've got like extreme patterns of behavior are really aggressive. Like it's always an opportunity to kind of channel that in the right way, because oftentimes the elite athletes do have a little bit of a different mindset. And so rather than push some of those athletes out, it could be an opportunity to see if you can cultivate them and use them and channel them in the right ways. A lot of athletes talk about how, they were struggling in life and maybe getting into the, hanging with the bad crowd and doing whatever in sport gave them that channel to go focus that energy. And, we also want to make sure that, each athlete, despite being maybe overly competitive, does get channeled in the right way too.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. And this has been a fantastic subject, and this is one that is going to continue to evolve what it takes to be an elite athlete in the changing landscape that we're in right now. Uh, Shay, how do you and how does Curve Health help elite level athletes?
So what we do is we give competitive youth sport athletes the resources that pro athletes often receive. So until really the last year or two, all of the best sports science monitoring tools and the best expertise, we're talking sports psychology to focus on your mental tactics and tools, your best sport nutrition, so you're fueling your body the right way, the best way to understand your injury risk, including your sleep and how you're moving, all your various movement patterns, your strength, your flexibility, all of this expertise to measure and manage that was really only available to pro level athletes because it was so expensive to bring it to the youth level. Well, youth sports changed, amateur sports changed, and a lot of these athletes could immensely benefit from that if it was more cost effective. The advancements in technology that we've been using AI to do biomechanical movement screens or computer vision assessments, or bringing in sports psychologists and nutritionists through a technology platform, we have built it in a way that elite youth level athletes can get access to these resources that they otherwise really couldn't have access to. So that it's an economic innovation, but also a technological innovation. So we're bringing now what we call the Curve Collective to elite level athletes. It's a membership model. Parents and athletes, they sign up and we work one-on-one with the parents to keep them fully informed, but we surround your athlete with a dedicated team of experts that are all focused on helping your athlete in a healthy way achieve the next level of play, right? To go on in their athletic career. So you have a dedicated sports psychologist that works with the nutrition, that works with the injury prevention specialist, updating the parents, working with your athlete, and it's all cost effective. So that
And
really
that's
hasn't been done before, and that's really what we do.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Coaches, go check it out at coachingyouthhoops.com/health. And Shay, tell the coaches what they get when they go there.
Absolutely. So for what we're doing for Coaching Youth Hoops, we have created a pretty powerful reporting tool. So we want to come out to your community and give coaches in a way to opt in all of their athletes into this and give them free access for the rest of the season to the Curve Collective. But we don't just want to ask coaches to pass this on to their athletes. We want to give coaches some value here. So what we've built for coaches is a reporting tool. All you got to do is sign up. It's not a lot of work. You just sign up, put your name in. We're going to send you some emails. You're going to get your own link to onboard your athletes. If they onboard, experience the Curve Collective, go through the evaluation process, we're going to give you as a coach a report so you can better understand the nature of your team. What are the mental obstacles or mental skills and strategies that are really struggling with? Where are they lacking some nutritional guidance? What do they really want to know more about? What about their sleep and their injury risk and where they're like reporting some issues? we aggregate that all together into a monthly report for coaches. So it's just a more informed way of coaching your athletes. Plus, you get to give them, which will often be their very first experience with sports science tools, right? These are high performance tools that have often only been used in pro sports.
I love that. I mean, just the idea that as a youth coach, I have a team. And in today's world, and if you're, that elite level athlete, it's going to take a team. And you guys, you've done it such that, you've kept the costs low, and bring a powerful set of tools to youth athletes. We appreciate you, Shay, bringing that to our community. We appreciate everything that you are doing to contribute to keep kids healthy, physically and mentally. It's a huge undertaking, and and I wish you nothing but success. We hope to have you back on the show real soon, and look forward to these deep dives. This has been a tremendous conversation, and like you said before, there's no one answer. At least, we're raising the discussion and having these, and to put questions into our listeners' mind too on how to handle these situations. So again, Shay, thank you. Can't thank you enough for what you've done for our community.
It was a pleasure, Bill. Really appreciate it.
All right, coaches, till next time. And again, go check out Curve Health. Go to coachingyouthhoops.com/health, and we'll see you on the next episode.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
If your brain is at full capacity with to-dos, birthdays, and dinner plans, meet Skylight Calendar. It syncs your entire family's schedule onto a sleek digital display, so you focus on important things like where you left your coffee. Right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/talk. Go to skylightcal.com/talk for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylightcal.com/talk.